The hospital hall smelled faintly of disinfectant and lilies from a bouquet someone had left by the nurse's station. I sat quietly on the bench near the maternity ward, my hands folded around a cup of cold tea I had long forgotten to drink. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above me, and the rhythmic beeping of distant monitors filled the silence like a sad lullaby. My daughter Elena had just given birth a moment that should have been pure joy. But the look in her eyes earlier told me something wasn't right. I had raised Elena to be strong, honest, and kind. She was my only child after her father passed away years ago. We had faced everything together, the debts, the sleepless nights, the loneliness. So when she met Adrian, a quiet and dependable young man who worked as an architect, I thought she had finally found stability, maybe even happiness. He loved her deeply, or so it seemed. And when they told me about the baby, I cried tears of relief. I thought life was finally rewarding her for all her struggles. But tonight, that peace shattered. As I sat there in the hallway, I heard the soft murmur of voices from the room down the corridor. The door was slightly ajar, and I could recognize Elena's voice instantly, weak but clear, like a melody I'd known all my life. Then came the whisper. "Don't tell her the baby isn't his." Her voice trembled, almost breaking at the end of the sentence. My heart stopped. I felt the cup slip from my hands, landing silently on the floor, the lukewarm tea seeping into my shoes. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. Maybe the medicine, the exhaustion, the tension, it could have made me imagine things. But then I heard another voice, soft and nervous. It was her friend Clara, who had been with her throughout the pregnancy. "Elena, please. You have to tell Adrian the truth. He deserves to know." "No," Elena whispered again, her voice breaking. "He'll never forgive me. He'll leave me. And I can't do that to the baby. I can't do that to him." I pressed my back against the cold wall, every beat of my heart echoing like thunder in my ears. The words hung in the air, heavy, poisonous. I didn't want to hear more, but I couldn't move. My knees felt weak, my breath caught somewhere between disbelief and pain. The baby isn't his. Those 4 words rewrote everything I thought I knew about my daughter's life, her marriage, her love. I wanted to rush into the room, to hold her, to ask why, but my body refused to move. Instead, I stood there, silent, listening to the truth unravel piece by piece. "Clara," Elena continued, her tone full of despair, "I made a mistake. It was one night, before Adrian came back from that trip. I thought he'd forgotten about me, that he was done with us. I was angry, lonely, and I didn't know what I was doing." She sobbed quietly, and I could hear the rustle of fabric, maybe Clara holding her hand. But when I found out I was pregnant, I prayed every day that it was Adrian's. I wanted it to be his. He's been so kind, so good to me. He talks to the baby every night, sings songs, plans the nursery. How can I destroy that? How can I tell him? Clara's voice softened. "But lies don't stay buried forever, Elena. What if he finds out on his own?" Elena didn't answer. I could only hear her crying soft, broken, like the sound of something precious cracking. I turned away before I heard any more. My feet carried me down the hallway, though I wasn't sure where I was going. I stopped near the window overlooking the quiet parking lot. The streetlights flickered against the rain-slicked pavement, and I watched the reflection of my own trembling hands. All my life, I believed that truth was the foundation of love. I taught Elena that honesty mattered, no matter how painful. And yet here I was, realizing my daughter had built her family on a secret that could shatter everything. I thought of Adrian, of the way he had waited outside the delivery room earlier. Pacing nervously, his eyes filled with hope, he had looked like a man ready to give his life for his wife and child. And when he saw the baby for the first time, he cried big, unashamed tears of love. How could I let him go on believing a lie? But how could I be the one to destroy my daughter's life? I stood there for what felt like hours, my mind spinning between love and duty, between compassion and justice. Every memory of Elena's childhood came flooding back, the nights she cried over heartbreaks, the mornings she laughed over burnt toast, the years she fought to find herself again. I had always protected her, always. Yet tonight I realized protection could also mean silence. The nurse walked by and smiled kindly. "You can go see them now, Mrs. Alvarez. The baby's doing well." I nodded numbly, my lips forming a thank you I didn't feel. As I walked back toward the room, my hands trembled so hard I had to clutch the door frame. Inside, the lights were dim, and the world seemed too peaceful for the storm inside me. Elena lay there, pale but glowing, the baby resting on her chest. Her eyes met mine, full of love, exhaustion, and fear. For a fleeting second, she looked like my little girl again, the one who used to run to me after a nightmare. "Mom," she whispered softly, smiling through tears. "Meet your grandson," I smiled back, my throat tight. "He's beautiful, sweetheart," and he was. Tiny fingers, perfect skin, breathing softly against her heart. He looked so peaceful, so innocent. As I leaned closer, the baby's eyes opened deep brown, like Elena's, not Adrian's pale gray. My heart broke all over again. Still, I smiled. Because in that moment, I knew what love meant. Sometimes it wasn't about truth or lies, it was about choosing which silence would hurt the least. But deep inside, I knew this silence would not last. The morning light filtered through the blinds, painting thin golden stripes across the hospital room. The baby, my grandson, though I couldn't stop hearing Elena's whisper echoing in my mind, slept peacefully in the clear bassinet beside the bed. His tiny chest rose and fell with quiet rhythm, unaware of the storm that hovered over him. Adrian stood near the window, his back straight but his eyes soft. I watched as he stared down at the baby with that quiet reverence only new fathers seem to know. His hands, usually steady from years of architectural precision, trembled slightly as he adjusted the blanket. He looked over at Elena and smiled, the kind of smile that carries both exhaustion and absolute devotion. "You did amazing," he said to her gently. "I still can't believe he's here. Our little miracle." Elena smiled faintly, but her eyes darted toward me for just a moment, nervous, searching. I tried to return her look with warmth, but I knew my expression betrayed the turmoil inside. She must have wondered if I had heard her the night before. I wanted to tell her I hadn't, but lying to her now would only add to the weight already pressing down on both of us. I took a deep breath and forced a smile. "He really is perfect," I whispered. "You both should rest," Adrian nodded. "I'll run home and bring some things for Elena," he said, kissing her forehead before heading for the door. "Don't worry about anything, love, just rest. I'll be back soon." The door closed behind him, and the silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. Elena stared down at her hands, twisting the edge of her blanket. I sat beside her, waiting. She didn't speak for a long time, but I could see her chest rise and fall with uneven breaths. Finally, she said in a small voice, "You heard me last night, didn't you?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. There was no point in pretending. "Yes, Elena, I did." Her eyes filled with tears instantly. "Mom, I never meant for this to happen. I swear I didn't." "I know," I said softly. "But you have to understand what this means. You can't hide something like this forever." She shook her head quickly. "Please, Mom, don't say anything. I'll fix it. I just need time." "Time?" I whispered, disbelief threading through my voice. "Time won't change who that baby's father is, Elena." Her face crumpled, and for a moment she looked so much like the little girl I used to comfort after nightmares. "I love Adrian," she said through tears. "I love him so much it hurts. And what I did, it was a mistake. I was scared, Mom. You don't understand what it felt like thinking he wouldn't come back, that I wasn't enough." I reached for her hand. "Elena, we all make mistakes. But lies grow. They twist everything they touch. You'll spend your whole life afraid someone will find out." She covered her face with both hands, sobbing quietly. The sound tore through me like glass. I wanted to protect her, the same way I always had. But how do you protect someone from the truth they created themselves? When she finally looked up again, her voice was barely a whisper. "He'll leave me if he knows, Mom. He'll take the baby, and I'll lose everything." I sat in silence, my mind spinning between right and wrong. I could feel the weight of generations pressing down on me, my mother's voice, my husband's memory, all whispering different things. One said, "Tell the truth." The other said, "Protect your child." Before I could respond, the nurse came in with her bright, practiced smile. "It's time for a quick checkup," she said, gently lifting the baby. Elena wiped her tears quickly, pretending everything was normal. I watched her switch masks so easily, so desperately, that my heart broke a little more. Later that afternoon, Adrian returned with flowers, clothes, and a smile that made me ache. He moved around the room with a quiet happiness, fixing pillows, adjusting Elena's blanket, taking the baby in his arms. He looked at the child like he had found his entire world in that tiny face. "Hey there, little man," he whispered, his voice trembling with love. "Daddy's here." I turned away for a moment, blinking back tears. Daddy. The word echoed in my mind, and I hated how it hurt. I hated that I was starting to see differences: the curve of the baby's lips, the color of his skin, the dark curls that matched no one in Adrian's family. Maybe I was imagining it, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. Adrian caught my gaze and smiled warmly. "You must be so proud, Mrs. Alvarez. You raised an amazing woman." I forced a smile, but my heart ached. "I am," I managed to say. "Very proud." Elena looked at me, then eyes wide, pleading silently for mercy. And in that moment, I made a choice. I wouldn't say anything. Not yet, because sometimes silence feels like love. And even if it was the wrong kind, I wasn't ready to be the one who tore their world apart. That night, I went home alone, the memory of the baby's soft cry still ringing in my ears. The house felt empty, even though everything was in its place: the photographs of Elena and Adrian smiling at their wedding, the nursery I helped decorate just weeks ago. I sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, and whispered into the quiet, "What do I do now, God?" No answer came, only the soft rhythm of rain and the echo of my daughter's voice. "Don't tell her the baby isn't his." The days that followed blurred together: visits, doctors, paperwork. Adrian never left Elena's side. He changed diapers, learned how to hold the baby, even sang lullabies off-key just to make them laugh. He was the kind of man every mother hopes her daughter will find. And Elena, she played her part perfectly. But I could see the cracks forming. The way her smile faltered when Adrian mentioned how much the baby looked like him. The way she avoided his eyes sometimes, her guilt thick as fog. One afternoon, as I held the baby in my arms, Elena whispered, "Mom, what if? What if I tell him someday? When the baby's older?" I looked at her, sadness flooding through me. "The longer you wait, the more it will hurt, Elena. Lies don't stay small, they grow." She nodded, but I could see she didn't believe me. She was clinging to the fragile hope that maybe, somehow, the truth would never surface. But deep down, I knew better. Secrets have a way of finding light, no matter how long you bury them. And when this one did, it would destroy more than just a marriage. It would destroy everything my daughter had built to survive. It had been 3 months since the baby little Luca came home. His laughter filled every corner of their apartment, softening the edges of the tension that simmered beneath the surface. To anyone looking in from the outside, they were the picture of a perfect family: a devoted husband, a radiant mother, and a beautiful, healthy child. But behind closed doors, Elena was crumbling piece by piece, and I could see it every time I visited. Adrian had returned to work, though he spent every spare moment at home. He adored Luca, often calling him my little twin. Every time he said that, I saw the way Elena's shoulders stiffened, her smile faltering for just a heartbeat. The resemblance wasn't there, not really, but love has a way of making us see what we want to see. One Sunday afternoon, I stopped by with a basket of homemade soup and fresh bread. Adrian greeted me warmly, holding Luca against his chest while humming a soft tune. Elena was in the kitchen, her back turned, scrubbing dishes that didn't need cleaning. "Hey, Mom," she said without looking at me. Her voice was flat, distant. I touched her arm gently. "You look tired, sweetheart. Are you getting any rest?" She let out a quiet laugh, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Rest with a newborn? That's a fantasy." Adrian walked in, still smiling. "She's exaggerating. She barely lets me do anything. I keep telling her to sleep more, but she's convinced she has to do everything herself." He turned to her, touching her cheek lovingly. "You're amazing, you know that?" I don't say it enough. Her eyes filled with tears, she quickly blinked away. "I'm fine, really, but I could see the truth." The weight of her secret was suffocating her, eating away at her joy. Every kind word from Adrian, every tender gesture, must have felt like a knife twisting deeper. After Adrian went to take a call, Elena leaned against the counter, her voice trembling. "I can't keep doing this, Mom. Every day it feels heavier." I look at him, at Adrian, and I can't breathe. I set the basket down and faced her. "Then tell him, Elena, before it's too late." She shook her head violently. "No, you don't understand. He told me once, before we were married, that he could never forgive betrayal. His father cheated on his mother, and it destroyed their family. He said if anyone ever did that to him, he'd walk away without looking back. Her eyes searched mine desperately. If he finds out, it'll kill him. It'll kill us. I wanted to tell her that love could survive truth, that honesty could heal, but even I wasn't sure that was true anymore. Sometimes truth doesn't heal. Sometimes it breaks everything in its path. That night, after dinner, I stayed to help put Luca to sleep. I watched Adrian rock him gently, humming an old lullaby his own mother used to sing. Elena stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, tears glistening in her eyes. When Adrian finally laid Luca in his crib, he turned to Elena and smiled. "He has your nose," he said softly. "Every day he looks more like you." I saw it then, the silent scream behind her smile, the guilt heavy in her chest. She excused herself and walked quickly to the balcony. I followed her quietly, closing the glass door behind us. Outside, the night air was cool, filled with the distant hum of city lights. Elena stood gripping the railing, staring down at the street below. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I feel like I'm drowning." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone, Elena, but you can't live like this forever." "I know," she said, her voice trembling. "I dream about it sometimes, about telling him. But then I see Luca in his arms, and I can't do it. I can't destroy the only happiness I've ever had." The wind tugged at her hair, and for a long moment, we just stood there in silence. I wanted to hold her, to protect her from the storm she had created, but I knew no one could shield her now. When I left later that night, I passed Adrian in the hallway. He was carrying a small blanket, humming softly to himself. He smiled when he saw me. "She's doing great, isn't she?" "I know she's tired, but she's amazing." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, she is." He paused, his brow furrowing slightly. "Is everything okay, Mrs. Alvarez?" "She's been a bit distant lately." "Is it just postpartum stuff?" For a second, I almost told him. The truth rose to my lips, heavy and burning. But then I saw the worry in his eyes, the love that still lived there, and I couldn't do it. "Not yet. She's just tired," I said softly. "She'll be fine." He nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thanks. I'll make sure she rests." When I got home, the house felt colder than usual. I sat down by the fireplace, wrapping my shawl tightly around my shoulders. I told myself I was protecting them, that silence was the kindest thing I could offer. But deep down, I knew I was only delaying the inevitable. The truth always finds its way out. It's patient, waiting for the smallest crack to slip through, and that crack came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks later, Adrian called me out of the blue. His voice was tight, uneasy. "Mrs. Alvarez, can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said, my heart suddenly pounding. "It's probably nothing," he began. But I was organizing Luca's things, and I found the hospital's paperwork. "There's something strange about the blood type listed there." My hand tightened around the phone. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "Elena and I are both O positive. But the baby's listed as AB. That's not possible, right?" The silence on my end stretched too long. He noticed. "Mrs. Alvarez?" I closed my eyes, feeling the world tilt beneath me. "Adrian," I said quietly, "you need to talk to Elena." He didn't respond at first. Then came the faint, broken sound of a man whose heart was beginning to realize the truth. "I was afraid you'd say that." The call ended, and I sat there in the stillness of my living room, my heart aching for all of them. The moment I had dreaded, the moment Elena had feared, was finally approaching. And no matter how much I prayed, I knew there was no saving what was about to break. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows. It was one of those gray mornings where the sky seemed to press down on the world, heavy and unforgiving. I had barely slept. Adrian's words from the night before echoed endlessly in my head. The baby's blood type. It's not possible, right? I knew what was coming. And though I had prayed, pleaded silently for some miracle that would delay it, there are some storms that don't wait for prayers to end. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed again. It was Elena. Her voice was raw, trembling. "Mom, he knows." My heart sank. "What happened?" There was silence on the line for a few seconds long. Broken silence, then a sob. He asked me last night about the hospital form. He said he just wanted to understand. I tried to laugh it off, to tell him maybe there was a mistake. But then he started asking more questions. About the timing, about that trip he took last year. He looked at me and I couldn't say anything. I froze. I could hear her breathing fast, struggling to speak through the tears. He left, Mom. He took his jacket and walked out. He didn't yell. He didn't even say goodbye. He just left. I gripped the edge of the table, my fingers trembling. Where are you now? At home, she whispered. He hasn't come back. He hasn't called. I've been sitting here all night watching the door. I'm coming over, I said, already grabbing my coat. When I arrived, the apartment looked untouched, except for the shattered picture frame on the floor, their wedding photo, glass cracked across Adrian's smiling face. Elena sat on the couch in her robe, her hair undone, her eyes swollen from crying. The baby was asleep in the crib, blissfully unaware of the storm that had swept through his home. I sat beside her, taking her cold hands in mine. Sweetheart, she shook her head. I deserve this. No one deserves pain like this, I whispered. Yes, I do. Her voice was fierce now, shaking. I lied to him. Every time he looked at me and said he loved me, I let him believe in something that wasn't real. I destroyed everything we had. Her words broke me. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that love could mend this, but I knew better. Some truths tear too deep. Just then, there was a sound at the door. Elena froze. The soft jingle of keys. Then the door opened. Adrian stepped in slowly, drenched from the rain. His eyes were red, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. The silence between them was unbearable. I stood up, but he lifted his hand slightly. Please, Mrs. Alvarez, can I talk to my wife alone? I nodded, kissed Elena's forehead and whispered, Be honest. No more hiding. Then I stepped out into the hallway, the sound of my own heartbeat filling my ears. Through the thin wall, I could hear muffled voices. At first calm, then trembling. Elena? Adrian said, his voice strained but steady. I called the hospital this morning. I wanted to make sure it wasn't a clerical error. They confirmed the results. Elena's voice broke. Adrian, please, he cut her off gently. Just tell me the truth. There was a pause so long I thought she might stay silent forever. Then came her whisper, raw and broken. It's true. A quiet gasp escaped from Adrian, sharp as a wound reopening. Who? He asked, his voice barely audible. Elena sobbed. It was before you came back from that project in Madrid. I thought you didn't want me anymore. It was one night, Adrian. One night I've regretted every single day since. Adrian didn't speak. I could hear his footsteps pacing, the floor creaking beneath him. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he said quietly, And the baby? Elena's sobs deepened. I didn't know how to tell you. I wanted it to be yours. I prayed it was yours. There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of rain outside and the baby's faint cry from the crib. Adrian's voice cracked when he finally spoke. Elena, I loved you more than I thought I could love anyone. I forgave every mistake, every doubt. But this, his voice broke. You didn't just betray me, you took away my choice to know the truth. I know, she whispered through her tears. And I'm so sorry, he sighed, a sound filled with defeat. Sorry doesn't fix this. It doesn't make him mine. There was a soft thud, maybe the sound of him setting down his wedding ring on the table. I covered my mouth, tears spilling down my face as I stood outside the door. I wanted to rush in, to hold them both, but I knew this was their moment. The truth had finally come, and all I could do was pray it wouldn't destroy them completely. After a few minutes, the door opened. Adrian stepped out, his face pale, eyes empty. He looked at me with a mixture of sorrow and respect. Mrs. Alvarez, he said quietly, thank you for everything you've done for us. Please, take care of Elena and the baby. Adrian, wait, I started, reaching for him. But he shook his head gently. I need time. I need to breathe. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hall until they disappeared completely. When I stepped back into the apartment, Elena was sitting on the floor, holding the baby tightly to her chest, sobbing into his blanket. He's gone, Mom. I've lost him. I knelt beside her, wrapping my arms around both of them. No, sweetheart. You lost the lie. But you still have the truth, and maybe one day you'll find forgiveness too. She buried her face against my shoulder, shaking. He'll never forgive me, I didn't answer, because I didn't know if he would. Outside, the rain kept falling steady, endless, like the world itself was mourning the love that had been lost inside that small apartment. And as I held my daughter and grandson close, I realized that sometimes truth doesn't set us free. Sometimes it simply shows us the cost of our choices and demands we carry it, no matter how heavy it becomes. Days turned into weeks, and still, Adrian didn't come home. His side of the closet remained untouched, the faint scent of his cologne lingering like a ghost that refused to leave. The baby's soft cries echoed through the apartment, breaking the heavy silence that hung over everything. I visited almost every day, bringing food, helping with Luca, trying to fill the void that Adrian's absence left behind. But nothing could soothe the quiet ache that followed my daughter everywhere she went. She moved like a shadow, mechanically changing diapers, warming bottles, forcing smiles that never reached her eyes. One afternoon, I found her sitting on the floor beside Luca's crib, staring blankly at the spinning mobile above his head. The room smelled faintly of baby powder and tears. "Elena," I said softly, kneeling beside her. "You need to eat something." She shook her head without looking up. "I'm fine." "You're not," I said gently. "You haven't eaten properly in days." Her lips trembled. "Every time I try, I feel sick. I keep hearing his voice, Mom, the way he said, 'You took away my choice.'" She buried her face in her hands. "He's right. I stole his truth." I wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You made a mistake, Elena, but you're not the only one paying for it." Her eyes lifted to the crib, where Luca was sleeping peacefully. "He didn't ask for any of this," she whispered. "He deserves a family, not this mess I made." I didn't know how to answer. There were no easy words, no gentle truths left to offer. All I could do was hold her and pray she would find her strength again. Later that evening, as I was leaving, the doorbell rang. Elena froze. For a moment, hope flickered in her eyes, wild, desperate hope. But when she opened the door, it wasn't Adrian. It was Clara, her closest friend. "Elena," Clara said softly, stepping inside. "I've been calling you." "You haven't answered." Elena looked drained, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know what to say. Clara hugged her tightly. "You don't have to say anything. I'm just here." I smiled faintly and took my leave, giving them space. I knew Clara's loyalty had always been unwavering, and perhaps her presence could heal something words couldn't. That night, as I walked home under the streetlights, I couldn't shake the image of Adrian's empty eyes. I had hoped time would bring him back, that love would soften the sharp edges of betrayal. But silence had stretched too long between them. A few days later, Elena called me again, her voice steadier this time. "Mom, I want to see him." "Are you sure?" I asked. "He may not be ready." "I can't live like this anymore," she said. "He deserves to hear everything from me." The next morning, I drove her to Adrian's new apartment. It was small, tucked away on the edge of town. He answered the door, surprised to see her standing there, pale but determined, with Luca cradled in her arms. "Elena," he said quietly, his voice guarded. "Why are you here?" She took a deep breath. "Because I can't keep pretending you don't deserve the truth." He hesitated but stepped aside to let her in. I stayed in the car, watching from the window, my heart pounding. From where I sat, I could see her talking, her hands trembling, her words spilling out in waves. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I saw the pain on her face, the tears she didn't try to hide this time. Adrian listened silently, his expression unreadable. After a long while, he stood, running a hand through his hair, his gaze falling on the baby sleeping in Elena's arms. He said something that made her nod, tears falling freely now. Then slowly, he reached out and touched Luca's tiny hand. Even from the car, I saw it, the small, almost imperceptible shift. A crack in the wall between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to it. When she came back out, her eyes were red, but there was a strange calm in them I hadn't seen in weeks. "What happened?" I asked gently. "He listened," she whispered. "He didn't forgive me, but he said he needed time, and he asked if he could still see Luca." I felt my heart tighten. "That's a start, sweetheart," she nodded. "He said, the baby may not be his by blood, but he'll always be his in heart. He doesn't want to punish Luca for my mistake. Tears welled in my eyes. That was Adrian honorable, kind even in pain. In the weeks that followed, Adrian began to visit again. Not for Elena, not yet, but for Luca. He'd come every few days, bringing small gifts, a stuffed bear, a tiny blue blanket, a rattle that made the baby giggle. The moments were awkward at first, heavy with things unsaid. But gradually, something began to soften in the quiet exchanges between him and Elena. One afternoon, I found the three of them sitting together in the park. Luca in Adrian's arms, Elena beside them, her expression gentle but uncertain. Adrian was telling a story something funny, judging by the faint smile that crossed her face. For the first time in months, they looked almost like a family again. When Adrian looked up and saw me, he nodded, a small, wordless acknowledgement. I smiled back, though my eyes stung, because sometimes love doesn't return the way we expect it to. It doesn't rush back in with forgiveness or wipe away the past. Sometimes it returns quietly tired, cautious, but still there, trying to find a way to heal. That night, Elena called me again. Her voice was soft, almost peaceful. "Mom, I don't know what the future holds. But for now," he said, "we can try, slowly." I felt tears slide down my cheeks as I whispered, "Then take it one day at a time, sweetheart. Healing doesn't come all at once. It grows in silence, like hope." And for the first time in a long while, when I hung up the phone, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, the truth hadn't destroyed everything after all. It had simply cleared the way for something real to begin. The days that followed carried a softness I hadn't seen in a long time, like the slow thawing of winter after a cruel, endless cold. The air between Elena and Adrian was still delicate, fragile as glass, but no longer filled with silence that hurt. Instead, there was conversation, small, cautious exchanges that stitched the first threads of something almost like forgiveness. I watched from the sidelines, careful not to interfere. Healing, I'd learned, couldn't be forced. It had to be chosen again and again, even when it hurt. Elena was still afraid. She'd call me late at night, whispering, "Mom, what if he changes his mind? What if he looks at Luca one day and can't love him anymore?" And I'd tell her gently, "Love isn't blind, sweetheart. It sees the truth and stays anyway. That's how you know it's real." One Sunday afternoon, I went to visit them. The apartment felt different now. There were fresh flowers on the table, sunlight streaming through open windows, and laughter soft, tentative, but real. Adrian was on the floor with Luca, holding up colorful blocks as the baby reached for them, giggling. Elena stood by the kitchen counter, watching them, her hands still damp from washing dishes. When she turned to me, her eyes were lighter than I'd seen in months. "He comes every morning now," she said quietly. "He helps with Luca, makes breakfast. Sometimes we just talk. About little things, books, work, anything but the past." I smiled. "That's how you start again. Not by forgetting, but by learning to live with what happened." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "He hasn't said he forgives me, but he doesn't look at me with hate anymore." "That's enough for now." Adrian glanced up then, catching our eyes. "Hey, Mrs. Alvarez," he said with a small smile. "Your grandson's got quite the grip. He won't let go of this block." I laughed softly. "He's strong. He gets that from his mother." Adrian's gaze lingered on Elena for a moment, and something tender flickered there, faint, but unmistakable. After lunch, while Elena put Luca down for his nap, Adrian helped me clear the table. The quiet stretched between us, comfortable but weighted. Finally, he spoke. "I've been thinking a lot, Mrs. Alvarez." His voice was low, steady. "About everything." I waited, giving him space. "When I found out," he continued, "I thought I'd never be able to look at Elena again without feeling betrayed. But then I saw Luca. He doesn't know any of this. He just reaches for me, smiles at me like I'm his whole world." He paused, eyes clouded. "How can I walk away from that?" I placed a hand on his arm. "Because you're not the kind of man who punishes the innocent for the sins of others. That's what makes you different." He nodded slowly. "I used to think betrayal was unforgivable. That once trust was broken, it was gone forever. But maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing who deserves another chance." His words lingered in the quiet room, heavy and hopeful all at once. That evening, as I prepared to leave, Elena came out of the nursery, her eyes tired but peaceful. Adrian stood beside her, their hands brushing as they both looked at the sleeping baby. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental, like the first step toward a new beginning neither of them dared to believe in yet. Weeks turned into months again, and life began to find rhythm. They weren't the same couple they once were. Innocence rarely returns once lost, but something deeper began to take its place. Respect, patience, quiet love. I watched as they rebuilt their home not with promises, but with presence. There were still hard days when old wounds reopened, when guilt or anger crept back in. But each time they chose to stay. And that choice, repeated again and again, became its own kind of forgiveness. One afternoon, I visited to find Adrian fixing the leg of the coffee table. Luca sat nearby, clapping his hands every time the screwdriver turned. Elena was on the couch, reading aloud from a storybook. The air was full of small, ordinary sounds, the ones that make a house feel alive. When Elena noticed me, she smiled. We were just telling Luca about his first trip to the park. I sat down beside her. Did he like it? She laughed softly. He tried to eat a flower. Adrian chuckled from across the room. He's got his mother's curiosity. Their laughter blended, natural and unforced. I felt tears rise to my eyes not from sadness, but from the fragile beauty of seeing something broken made whole again. Not perfectly, but enough. Later that night, after dinner, Elena walked me to the door. Mom, she said quietly, I never thanked you. For what? I asked, for not judging me, for not telling him before I was ready, for standing by me even when I didn't deserve it. I reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face. You're my daughter. I may not always agree with your choices, but I'll always stand beside you. That's what mothers do. She hugged me tightly, whispering, I'm going to make this right, Mom. For Adrian, for Luca, for all of us. And I believed her. Because there was strength in her voice again, a quiet, steady strength I hadn't heard since before that whisper in the hospital hallway had changed everything. As I drove home under the pale glow of streetlights, I thought about how fragile truth and love could be. One can shatter the other, but sometimes if the heart is brave enough, they can learn to live side by side. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It just loosens its hold. And watching my daughter slowly rebuild her life, I realized that even broken love, if nurtured with honesty and patience, can bloom again. It won't ever look the same. But maybe, just maybe, it can still be beautiful. The months rolled quietly into a year, and with them came a fragile sense of peace. Elena and Adrian had settled into something that looked, from the outside, like calm. They shared laughter again, tentative, soft around the edges, but still laughter. Luca had learned to walk, his little steps filling the apartment with the kind of joy that made even the hardest days lighter. It wasn't perfect. There were moments when silence still stretched too long between them, moments when the past rose uninvited, like a ghost lingering in the corners of their home. But every time Adrian chose to stay, and that, I had learned, was its own quiet form of love. Then one afternoon the phone rang. It was Elena. Her voice trembled, thin and frightened. Mom, we're at the hospital. My heart dropped. What happened? It's Luca, she whispered, her words breaking. He fell. He's not waking up properly. They're doing tests. I was already grabbing my keys before she finished the sentence. By the time I reached the hospital, the memories of that same sterile hallway, the place where everything had first unraveled, came flooding back. I found them in the pediatric ward. Elena sat hunched in a chair, her face pale and wet with tears. Adrian was pacing near the door, running a hand through his hair over and over, his face twisted in helpless fear. What happened? I asked softly, touching Elena's shoulder. He hit his head on the corner of the coffee table, she said, her voice shaking. He cried at first, but then he got sleepy, and he wouldn't wake up. I should have been watching him more closely. I knelt beside her. This isn't your fault. Adrian stopped pacing and turned to face us. His eyes were red, his voice breaking. They said he might have a mild concussion. They're running more tests just to be sure. We waited together in silence, the steady beeping of monitors filling the unbearable stillness. I watched Adrian, the way he hovered near Elena, protective, desperate, afraid. The walls he had built around himself were gone. Fear had stripped them bare. After what felt like hours, the doctor came out. He's stable, she said gently. The scan looks good. Just a mild concussion. He'll be fine. Elena broke down in tears, covering her face as Adrian pulled her into his arms. For a moment, all the pain, guilt, and distance melted away. They clung to each other like people who'd remembered, all at once, what truly mattered. Later, after Luca was moved to a private room, I stepped outside to give them space. I stood by the window in the corridor, staring out at the rain beginning to fall, soft and steady. And then I heard the faint sound of Adrian's voice behind me. She thinks I can't forgive her, he said quietly. I turned. He was standing there, his expression weary but open. Can you? I asked gently. He hesitated, looking down the hall toward the room where Elena sat beside the crib, her hand resting on Luca's tiny leg. I thought I couldn't, he said finally. Every time I looked at her, I saw the lie. But tonight, when I thought I might lose him, all I saw was how much she loves him, how much she's fought to keep us together. Maybe forgiveness isn't a decision you make once. Maybe it's something you keep choosing, even when it hurts. I smiled softly. It is. That's how real love survives. It learns to live with pain and still choose hope. He nodded, eyes glistening. I'm not the father of his blood, but I am the father of his life. And that's enough for me. When we returned to the room, Elena looked up, startled. Her eyes flickered between us, unsure of what had passed. Adrian walked to her slowly, knelt beside the chair, and took her hand. Hey, he said softly, his voice trembling. He's strong, just like his mom. She tried to smile through her tears. I thought I lost him. Adrian shook his head gently. We're not losing anyone. Elena's eyes searched his face, her voice fragile. You don't have to stay, Adrian. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. You've already given us more grace than I deserve. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. Maybe, but grace isn't something we earn, Elena. It's something we give, and I'm choosing to give it to you. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks. She covered her mouth with her hand as a sob escaped her. I don't know how to thank you. Just don't make me regret it, he said, his voice cracking slightly, but there was a faint smile on his lips. I turned away, pretending to busy myself with the flowers on the table, because the moment between them felt sacred, too raw to intrude upon. As night settled over the hospital, we stayed by Luca's bedside. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor had become oddly comforting. Elena fell asleep first, her head resting against Adrian's shoulder. He didn't move, just kept watching over both of them, his hand resting gently on Luca's blanket. When his gaze met mine across the room, I saw peace there for the first time in a long while. Not the naive peace of forgetting, but the kind that comes from surviving something together and still standing. In the soft glow of the monitor, I whispered a prayer of gratitude. For mercy, for love that endures, for second chances. And as I watched my daughter sleeping beside the man she'd once broken, I realized that sometimes pain doesn't end us, it remakes us. When morning came, Luca woke with a sleepy smile, reaching out for his parents. Adrian lifted him into his arms, pressing his lips to the boy's forehead. Elena looked on, her eyes full of tears, whispering, Thank you. He looked back at her, his voice quiet but steady. We'll take it one day at a time. And for the first time, it didn't sound like a promise made out of duty. It sounded like hope. Spring came softly that year, as if the world itself was trying to start over. The air smelled of wet earth and blooming jasmine, and sunlight filled every corner of Elena and Adrian's apartment. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel haunted by silence, it felt alive. Luca was nearly 2 now, babbling words that tumbled out in adorable nonsense. His laughter had become the new rhythm of their home, the music that drowned out the echoes of the past. I visited one afternoon to find the 3 of them in the garden behind their building. Adrian was helping Luca chase butterflies while Elena watched from a nearby bench, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not the forced, fragile smile of guilt, but something genuine, light, almost peaceful. When she saw me, she waved. Mom, he just said flower for the first time. Adrian laughed softly. Well, it sounded more like fluff, but close enough. Their laughter was contagious. I felt my heart swell just watching them. After everything they had survived, the betrayal, the distance, the silence, it was a miracle to see them here, together, choosing joy again. Later, when Luca dozed off in his stroller, Elena sat beside me on the bench. The sunlight caught the gold in her hair, and for a moment, she looked like the girl I used to know, the one who believed love could fix everything. "Mom," she said quietly, her voice thoughtful. "I used to think forgiveness was something you had to earn. But Adrian, he never made me earn it. He just decided one day to start trying again." I smiled. "That's because forgiveness isn't about fairness, Elena. It's about love that chooses peace over punishment." She nodded slowly. "He told me once that the hardest part wasn't forgiving me, it was learning how to trust himself again. Learning that he could open his heart without being afraid." I looked over at Adrian then, crouched in the grass, watching Luca sleep with that gentle patience of his. There was something steady about him, something rooted. Pain had changed him, but not in the way anger does. It had softened him, deepened him. Elena leaned against my shoulder. "Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking it's all going to fall apart again. And then I hear Luca breathing between us, and I remember that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real." I squeezed her hand. "You learned the hardest lesson there is, that love isn't just about how we begin. It's about how we stay." That evening, Adrian joined us on the bench, his expression calm, thoughtful. "I was offered a new project," he said quietly. "It's in Valencia. It's a big opportunity, but it means moving." Elena's eyes widened. "Moving, as in, all of us?" He nodded. "If you want to." For a moment her face was unreadable. Then slowly she smiled. "A fresh start," he smiled back. "Together this time." Tears glistened in her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, together." The way he looked at her then, gentle, unwavering, told me everything I needed to know. Whatever scars they carried, they weren't running from them anymore. They were building something new on top of them, brick by brick, truth by truth. When I helped Elena pack a few weeks later, the apartment was filled with boxes and the laughter of a family ready to begin again. There were no traces of bitterness in the air, only gratitude. She found an old photo tucked in a drawer, one from their wedding day, before everything fell apart. She stared at it for a long moment, then placed it gently into a box marked "Keep." "Do you think we'll ever be that happy again?" she asked softly. I smiled. "You already are. You just know what happiness costs now," she smiled faintly. "And it's worth every bit of it." The night before they left, they invited me over for dinner. Adrian cooked something simple, his famous rosemary chicken, and Luca danced around the kitchen holding a wooden spoon like a baton. After we ate, Adrian raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said softly. Elena added, "and to second chances." I lifted mine last. "And to love that learns how to stay." We clinked glasses, the sound delicate and full of promise. Later, as I stood by the door, saying goodbye, Adrian hugged me for the first time since everything happened. His voice was quiet. "Thank you, Mrs. Alvarez, for not turning your back on us." I felt tears rise to my eyes. I never could. Families aren't meant to be perfect, Adrian. They're meant to endure. He smiled, that warm, steady smile I remembered. "We'll come visit soon. Luca already adores his abuela." When they drove away the next morning, I stood on the porch watching their car disappear down the road, sunlight spilling over the horizon. I felt both sadness and sadness for the years lost to pain, but peace for what they'd found again. Some wounds don't disappear. They simply stop hurting so loudly, and in their quiet new life grows. Months later, I received a photo in the mail. The three of them standing by the sea in Valencia, wind in their hair, sunlight on their faces. On the back, in Elena's handwriting, it said, "We're learning, Mom. Not to forget, but to live. Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't die, it changes." I held that photo against my heart and whispered a prayer of gratitude. For them, for the lesson I'd been given, for the truth that even broken things, when held with enough tenderness, can become beautiful again. Because love, real love, isn't about perfection. It's about resilience. It's about staying when everything inside you says run. And as I looked out the window at the setting sun, I knew one thing for certain. Forgiveness had not only saved them. It had saved all of us. 5 years passed before I realized how much time had softened everything. Seasons came and went like gentle sighs, and with each one, the distance between what once was and what now is grew quieter, less sharp. Elena, Adrian, and Luca had built a life in Valencia, a life full of sunlight, ocean breeze, and laughter that no longer carried the sound of pain beneath it. They sent photos often. Luca at the beach, his hair tangled with salt and wind. Elena smiling as she painted on the balcony. Adrian reading stories by candlelight, his son curled against his chest. When I visited them that summer, I found their home exactly as I had hoped, bright, warm, alive. Luca was 6 now, tall for his age, with his mother's eyes and a kindness that mirrored Adrian's heart. He ran to me the moment I arrived, shouting, "Abuela!" before wrapping his little arms around my legs. Elena stood in the doorway, watching with tears in her eyes. "He's been counting the days," she said softly. "So have I told her, holding him close. Adrian appeared behind her, smiling. "Welcome home, Mrs. Alvarez," I laughed. "I see some things never change, you still won't call me by my first name." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Old habits die hard." We spent the afternoon in the garden. The air smelled faintly of oranges and salt. Elena had planted a row of lavender bushes that swayed gently in the coastal wind. Watching her now strong, centered, unafraid, I saw a woman who had faced her storm and walked out of it not broken, but wiser. After lunch, when Adrian took Luca for ice cream, she and I sat on the porch, the sun dipping low over the water. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked quietly, her gaze lost somewhere in the horizon. "The past?" I asked. She nodded. "That night in the hospital. The choices I made. The way everything nearly fell apart. I thought for a long moment before answering. Sometimes. But only as a reminder of how far you've come. Not as something to regret." She smiled faintly. "I still have dreams about it sometimes. Not nightmares exactly. Just moments." The whisper. The look on his face when he knew. It used to haunt me. And now? She turned to me, her eyes soft. Now it just feels like something that happened to another version of me. Someone I needed to be before I learned who I am now. I reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "That's what growth feels like, Elena. It's not forgetting. It's forgiving yourself." She nodded, her lips trembling just slightly. "I didn't think I'd ever deserve this peace. But Adrian, he taught me what grace really means. He says love isn't something that gets weaker after pain. It just gets quieter, steadier." I smiled. He's right. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the waves crash softly in the distance. The sky turned shades of pink and gold, the kind of sunset that makes the world feel gentle again. When Adrian and Luca returned, the boy ran straight to his mother, ice cream smeared across his cheeks. "Mommy, I gave Daddy a flower for you, but he dropped it." Adrian laughed, holding up a crushed daisy. "In my defense, someone tackled my leg while I was holding it." Elena smiled, shaking her head. "It's perfect," she said, taking the flower and tucking it into her hair. I watched the 3 of them together, how natural they were now, how the love between them no longer had to be mended each day. It simply was. Strong, quiet, enduring. That night, after Luca went to bed, Adrian poured us tea and joined us on the porch. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think forgiveness was something you gave once. But I've realized it's something you live. Every day. It's in how you speak, how you choose to stay, how you choose to love even when it's easier not to." Elena looked at him, her eyes glistening. "You saved me," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, we saved each other." I turned away for a moment, letting the tenderness of their words wash over me. Love like theirs, the kind that survives truth, silence, and time, wasn't common. It was built slowly, brick by brick, with a patience most people never learn. Before bed, I tucked Luca in. He looked up at me sleepily and said, "Abuela, why do you smile so much?" I chuckled. "Because I'm proud of your mommy and daddy." "Why?" I brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "Because they learned that love doesn't have to be perfect to last forever." He nodded, already half asleep, whispering, "Like my storybook heroes." I kissed his forehead. Exactly like that. The next morning, as I packed my things to leave, Elena hugged me tightly. "Mom, thank you for everything. For believing I could still be good after I'd fallen so far." Tears pricked my eyes. "You never stopped being good, Elena. You just lost your way for a while. But even in the dark, love found you." She smiled through her tears. It did. As I boarded the train back home, I looked out the window one last time. There they stood, Elena waving with one hand, Adrian's arm around her shoulders, Luca perched on his father's hip, grinning with the sunlight in his hair. And I realized something I hadn't before. That love's truest miracle isn't in how it begins, but in how it endures after it's been broken. Because forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a lifetime of choosing to see light where darkness once lived. And as the train carried me away, I whispered to myself, the whisper that once shattered us, became the reason we learned to love deeper than before. 15 years later, I sat on the porch of my daughter's home in Valencia, the same garden where butterflies still drifted lazily between the lavender bushes. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and rose. The air smelled of salt, of summer, of life that had long since learned to be gentle again. Time had turned my hair silver and my steps slower, but peace had settled into me like the sea after a storm. Elena was 40 now, her beauty softened by time but deepened by grace. Adrian had grown into that rare kind of man who carried kindness like armor, quiet, steady, unshakable. And Luca, no longer a child, stood taller than both of them, a young man with his mother's eyes and his father's calm. I had come to visit for the week, as I often did, though lately I found myself watching them with a quiet sort of awe. Their love had endured in a way that few loves ever do, not by ignoring the past, but by accepting it fully. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, I noticed a stillness in Elena's expression. The way she looked at Luca was different, thoughtful, hesitant, like a woman who had been carrying something for too long. After dinner, while Adrian washed the dishes and I poured tea, she said softly, "Mom, I think it's time." My hand froze on the teapot. "Time for what, sweetheart?" Her voice trembled slightly. "To tell Luca the truth about everything." I looked at her, my heart suddenly heavy. I had known this moment would come eventually, but I had hoped it would be years still. "Are you sure?" She nodded slowly. "He's old enough now. He deserves to know who he is and who we all are." Adrian came back into the room then, wiping his hands on a towel. He must have heard us because his gaze softened. "We've talked about this," he said. "It's time." That night I sat in the corner of the living room while the three of them gathered on the couch. The fireplace flickered low, painting their faces in amber light. Luca looked confused, glancing between his parents. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" Elena took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "Luca," she began softly, "there's something we've never told you. Not because we wanted to hide it from you, but because we wanted you to grow up surrounded by love, not questions." Luca frowned slightly, his eyes searching hers. "What do you mean?" Adrian reached over, placing a hand on her back, steadying her. "What your mother means," he said gently, "is that there's more to your story than you know." Elena's voice cracked as she continued. "When I found out I was pregnant with you, I was scared. I made mistakes before your father came back into my life. And for a long time, I didn't know if telling you would cause more pain than good. But I don't want to keep secrets from you anymore, my love. You deserve the truth." Luca's brow furrowed. "Are you saying Dad isn't my biological father?" Her tears fell silently then. "Yes." The word hung in the air like the last note of a song. Luca looked between them both, confusion turning to something deeper: shock, hurt, disbelief. "And you both knew this? All these years?" Adrian's eyes were steady, calm. "I knew, son, since before you could walk. But it doesn't change what's true. You are my son. You always will be." Luca's lips parted, his voice barely a whisper. "How could you forgive that?" Adrian smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. "Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting what hurt us. It's about choosing to love someone even when you know their flaws. Your mother made a mistake, yes, but she also gave me you, and I wouldn't trade that for anything in this world." Luca sat in silence, tears filling his eyes now. "So, the man who's my real father, do I know him?" Elena shook her head. "No, he was never part of our lives. He doesn't even know you exist. But I want you to know something, Luca." She reached for his hand, her voice trembling but sure. "You were born out of pain, yes, but you were raised out of love. Every moment of your life, you've been wanted, protected, and cherished." He looked at her then, and something in his expression softened. The confusion, the shock, it all began to melt away under the weight of her sincerity. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. Adrian smiled, reaching for his shoulder. You don't have to say anything. Just know that truth doesn't change love. It only deepens it. For a long time, no one spoke. The only sound was the quiet crackling of the fire and the soft rhythm of three hearts learning to beat in truth together. Then Luca leaned forward, wrapping his arms around both of them. Thank you, he whispered. For telling me. For still being here. For never letting me feel like I didn't belong. Tears filled my eyes as I watched them, three lives bound not by perfection, but by love that had chosen, again and again, to endure. Later, when Luca had gone to bed, Elena came to sit beside me on the porch. The night air was cool, stars scattered across the sky like promises. Do you think he'll ever see me differently? She asked quietly. I took her hand. Yes, I said honestly. But not in the way you fear. One day, he'll see you for what you truly are, a woman who made a mistake, but also the courage to make it right. That's the kind of mother who changes her child's life. She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. I feel lighter tonight, Mom, like I can finally breathe. I smiled. That's what truth does, Elena. It doesn't destroy love, it purifies it. When she went inside, I sat alone for a while longer, listening to the sea. And I realized that life, for all its chaos, had given us something rare, a second chance at peace. Because love, once broken, doesn't disappear. It transforms. It humbles us, tests us, and if we let it, it saves us. And as the waves rolled softly under the moonlight, I whispered to the night what I had learned from my daughter's story. Sometimes the hardest truths don't end love, they begin it again. In its truest form. The sound of the sea was the first thing I remembered that morning, the steady rhythm of waves brushing the sand, soft and endless. It was the same sound that had filled my childhood, the backdrop to every memory that made me who I am. My name is Luca Alvarez, and I'm 23 years old. And though I've carried many truths in my life, there's one that shaped me more than any other, the night my parents told me who I truly was. It's strange, how one conversation can change everything and still leave the most important things untouched. I remember the way the firelight flickered on my mother's face, the way her voice trembled as she told me about the choice she'd made before I was born. I remember my father's silence, the kind that wasn't cold but steady, like an anchor. I remember thinking, so this is what love looks like. Not perfect, but real. For a long time after that night, I wrestled with questions I didn't know how to ask. Who was my biological father? Why had my mother stayed silent for so long? And most of all, what did it mean for the man I had always called Dad? But every time doubt crept in, Adrian, my father, answered without words. He was there. He showed up. He laughed with me, argued with me, taught me how to drive, how to stand tall when life pushed too hard. He didn't love me less after I knew the truth. If anything, he loved me more, as if he wanted to make sure I never mistook biology for belonging. And my mother, she never shied away from the truth again. She answered every question I asked, even when her voice broke. She didn't defend her choices. She didn't ask for pity. She simply owned her past with a kind of quiet strength that made me admire her more than I ever had before. Now, as an adult, I can see what I couldn't back then. That forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It transforms it. It turns wounds into wisdom. I became a writer, maybe because I've always been haunted by stories, especially the kind that begin with brokenness and end in grace. My first book was about my parents. I called it The Whisper in the Hallway. It wasn't meant to expose their secrets, but to honor what they taught me. That love isn't fragile. It's forged. When I gave them the first printed copy, my mother cried before she even opened it. My father smiled quietly, the same way he always did when words meant too much for speech. They read it together that night. And when they finished, my mother told me something I'll never forget. You know, she said, her hand resting over mine. That whisper in the hospital, it ruined me for a while. But it also saved me. Because if I hadn't faced what I did wrong, I never would have learned what real love was. The kind your father gave me. The kind you've grown up to understand. I looked at her, and I saw not the woman who made a mistake, but the woman who became stronger because of it. I saw the years of regret, yes, but also the redemption that followed. Adrian smiled, glancing at her with the kind of affection that time can't fade. She's right, he said softly. Love isn't about what you deserve. It's about what you choose to give, even when it hurts. That night after they'd gone to bed, I stood on the balcony overlooking the sea. The moonlight shimmered over the water, and I thought about how life had come full circle. My parents had taught me everything worth knowing, not through perfection, but through persistence. They taught me that love doesn't die in the face of truth. It simply learns to breathe differently. Years later, when my mother turned 60, I asked her if she ever regretted anything. She smiled wistfully, her hands folded in her lap. "Sometimes," she said, "but not the way you think. I regret hurting people I love, yes, but I don't regret the truth that came from it. Because that truth gave me everything that matters now: you, your father, our peace." I nodded, understanding in a way I couldn't have when I was younger. Now, as I tell this story to the world not as a secret, but as a legacy, I realize that love stories aren't made from perfection. They're built from failure, forgiveness, and faith in something stronger than pain. When people read my book, they often ask me the same question: how did your father forgive your mother? And my answer is always the same. He didn't forgive her once. He forgave her every day, quietly, until the pain stopped asking for attention. They usually go silent after that. Because in a world obsessed with the idea of flawless love, few people understand that forgiveness is its most sacred form. A few weeks ago, I visited their home again. The lavender bushes still bloomed, and the sea still sang its familiar lullaby. My mother was painting in the garden, sunlight catching the streaks of silver in her hair. My father was sitting nearby, reading, still content just to be close to her. I walked up behind them, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "You know," I said softly, "if it weren't for everything that went wrong, I don't think I'd believe in love the way I do." My mother smiled, setting down her brush. "Then maybe it was all worth it." Adrian looked up from his book, his eyes kind and knowing. "Pain always leaves a gift behind, Luca. You just have to be patient enough to open it." That night, as I drove home along the coastal road, I felt the same peace I used to feel when I was a child, falling asleep between them, safe, loved, and whole. The truth didn't destroy us. It refined us. And if there's one thing I've learned from being their son, it's this: the whisper that once broke our family became the echo that held us together. Because love, real love, isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking, and still choosing to begin again. The sea looked almost the same as it had when I was a child. Calm, endless, shimmering beneath the gold of late afternoon. Time had softened the edges of everything, even the ache that once clung to the name Alvarez. The waves whispered against the sand like an old friend repeating stories I already knew by heart. I parked the car near the small white house overlooking the shore, the one where my parents had retired. Lavender still grew along the path leading to the door, swaying gently in the warm breeze. The air carried the scent of salt and rosemary. It smelled like home. As I stepped inside, I found my mother sitting by the window, a blanket draped over her knees, a sketchbook open in her lap. Her hair was completely silver now, her face traced with lines that time had carved lovingly. But her eyes, those deep, unwavering brown eyes, were still the same. She looked up and smiled. "You're early, mi amor." I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Couldn't wait. I brought the new manuscript," she chuckled softly. "You and your stories. You never stop writing." "Because you never stopped living," I said. She shook her head, smiling faintly, but I could see her pride hidden behind the modesty. My mother had always carried grace in her silence. She was the kind of woman who turned regret into wisdom and pain into art. From the kitchen, I heard the clatter of dishes. Adrian emerged a moment later, a towel slung over his shoulder, his smile as warm as the light that filled the room. His hair was white now, his posture a little bent, but he still had that same quiet steadiness that defined my childhood. "Luca," he said, his voice deep and calm. "Come here, son." He embraced me with the same strength he always had, the kind of hug that made the years fall away. "You look tired," I said, noticing the faint tremor in his hand. He chuckled. "Tired comes with the territory. Your mother insists on baking bread every morning, and I'm her taste tester. It's a tough life," she smiled, her eyes sparkling. "He complains, but he eats every last piece." I laughed, sitting with them in the sunlit kitchen, watching how easily they fell into rhythm. It struck me how love, when it lasts long enough, becomes language unspoken, effortless. After lunch, I walked with my father along the shore. The tide was low, the water glinting like glass. He moved slowly, leaning on his cane, but his steps were sure. "Your mother's been painting again," he said, glancing at me. "She says it helps her remember." "Remember what?" I asked. He smiled softly. "Everything we survived." We walked in silence for a while. I could hear the gulls crying overhead, the soft crash of waves, the echo of time passing gently between us. "Do you ever think about it?" I asked. "The early years?" "The pain?" He nodded. "Sometimes, but not with sadness. Pain was a teacher, Luca. It taught me how to love without conditions. Your mother made a mistake, yes, but she also taught me that forgiveness isn't a favor you give. It's a freedom you choose." His words settled deep in me. Even after all these years, he was still teaching me what love meant. That evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sea in amber, my parents and I sat together on the porch. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she held her tea, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Do you remember, Luca?" she said softly. "The first time you saw the ocean?" I smiled. "You said it was alive, that it could listen." She nodded. "I used to come here every morning when you were little, talking to the waves. Back then I still carried guilt. I thought if I talked to the sea long enough, maybe it would forgive me." I reached for her hand. "You were forgiven long before that, Mom." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Maybe, but I had to learn to forgive myself too." "That took longer." Adrian took her other hand, his thumb brushing the back of her fingers. "We both had to learn that. Together." The three of us sat in quiet reverence as the sun disappeared beneath the horizon. The light faded, but something brighter lingered between us, peace, earned slowly over years of truth, forgiveness and love. Later that night, after they had gone to bed, I sat by the old wooden desk in the corner of the living room, the same one where my father used to draw his blueprints. I opened my notebook and began to write. Forgiveness is not a door you walk through once it's a road you walk every day. It's the choice to keep walking even when the past follows behind you like a shadow. But eventually, if you walk long enough, even the shadow learns to rest. When I finished, I looked around the house, the photographs on the walls, the scent of lavender drifting through the open window, the faint sound of my parents' laughter from their room, and I realized that their story had always been my greatest story. Years passed again, quietly and gently. My parents grew older. Time, patient and kind, began to slow their world. I visited often, sometimes for weeks at a time. Every visit felt like returning to the root of everything good in me. Then came the autumn when the lavender wilted early. The year the sea turned gray and restless. That was the year my father's heart began to fail. He was 82, still smiling, still gentle, still calling my mother mi sol, my son, even on days when his body betrayed him. When the doctor told us there wasn't much time left, my mother simply nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks, but she said only, "We had more than I ever deserved." He spent his last days in the house by the sea. On the final evening, the sunset poured golden light across the bed, and my mother sat beside him holding his hand. I sat near the window, silent witness to love's truest form. He turned to her and whispered, his voice faint but sure, "I don't regret a single day." She smiled through her tears. "Not even the hard ones?" "Especially the hard ones," he said. "They made us who we are." And then, just before his last breath, he whispered the same words he'd said to her decades ago, words that had survived everything. "I choose you." He passed as the waves touched the shore outside, the sea carrying his final breath into the horizon. After the funeral, I stayed with my mother for a long while. She moved slower now, but her spirit remained unbroken. Every morning, she walked to the water's edge with a basket of lavender, letting the waves take a few sprigs. "One for forgiveness," she told me one morning. "One for love. And one for every second chance we were given." I watched her, realizing that she wasn't saying goodbye to him. She was continuing their conversation, one whisper at a time. A few years later, when her health began to fade, I brought her home with me. She spent her final days surrounded by light and family, her sketchbook stacked by the bed. One evening, she asked me to bring one of them closer. Inside was a watercolor of the sea, the same view from the porch, painted in soft blues and golds. On the bottom corner, she had written a single line: "Forgiveness is the art of loving twice." She passed that night, peaceful, her hand resting over the page. Now, as I stand at the same shore years later, I feel both of them here. The sea still hums their song, the wind still carries her laughter. The lavender grows wild again, filling the air with memory. I sit on the porch with my daughter Clara, named after my mother's dearest friend, and tell her their story. She listens with wide eyes, her small hand in mine. "So Grandpa wasn't your real dad?" she asks, her voice innocent. I smile. "He was more real than anyone could ever be." She tilts her head. "Did they love each other even after the mistake?" I look out at the horizon, where the sun is setting over the same sea that once heard all our confessions. "They didn't just love each other," I say softly. "They learned how to." Clara rests her head on my shoulder. "I hope I find love like that one day." I smile, brushing her hair from her face. "Then you'll have to learn forgiveness first." We sit there as the sky darkens, the sound of waves folding over themselves again and again. And in that moment, I finally understand what my parents had been trying to teach me all along. That love's greatest strength isn't in how it begins, but in how it endures through truth, through pain, through the quiet mercy of choosing to stay. Because at the end of all things, love isn't a promise, it's a practice, and forgiveness, it's the art of beginning again, every single day. As the last light fades, I whisper the words my father once said to my mother, the words that carried through our generations like a sacred echo: "I choose you, always."